encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Conversations about life, Christianity, and culture. Could it be? Is it really? Four preachers and a podcast. Welcome in, everyone, to Season 5, Episode number 1. We are 3 strong because Hiram is too busy to record with us for Season 5, Episode 1. But from Henderson, Tennessee, I'm Robert Hatfield. From Moulton, Alabama, it is Brad McNutt. Hey, Brad.
What's up? Just sitting here with my teeth in my mouth.
Well, I'm proud that's where they are. From North
Sorry,
Charleston, South Carolina, it's Chance Hicks. Chance, are your teeth in your mouth?
Absolutely.
Okay,
that's
good.
where I keep them every day.
It's
Sorry,
9
one of my
p.m.
friends here says
Do
that
you know
all the
where
time.
your teeth are?
Not that. That's creepy. You call him and you ask him, "Hey, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm sitting here with my teeth in my mouth." It's gonna be a good season. It's gonna be a good season.
It's going to be a great season. Wow. Okay. Welcome in. We're going to do a little mini season here. Many of you have asked if we had fallen ill. No more so than the mental illnesses that we struggled with in the previous 4 seasons. But today we are beginning a little mini season that will last. We're kicking this off in April. This will last through May. It's about a 6-parter. And so we thought we would do a mini series on an issue that has become a popular one. We're going to be talking about church hurt. So that's going to start today, and then we've got 5 more parts after it. Today we're talking about church hurt and understanding church hurt and what exactly we're talking about. And we're going to look at a biblical look at this and sort of have an unscripted conversation about it. I want to say as we begin that we believe church hurt is a real thing. And so we're not going to make light of it or make fun of it. Having said that, we also believe that just like any major issue, the term can become a buzzword that is then overused or used out of context, in ways that it actually isn't. And unfortunately, that actually hurts those who are experiencing actual church hurt. I mean, it makes culture, even within the church, sort of look at that issue less seriously. So we're going to try and straddle that balance in just the right way. And as we do that, we're going to ask you to be patient with us because it may take us a little while in our conversations over the next 6 episodes to hit on the specific area that you are thinking of when you think about church hurt. So, just be patient with us. We're going to have an organic conversation. Hopefully it'll be a good one and help to shine a light on this from a variety of perspectives, but just be patient with us as we go. Those are some caveats I kind of had in mind. Brad or Chance, y'all have anything you want to say, like kind of like that, like a caveat that we might need to express before we get into what we're going to talk about today?
No, I mean, I think you're right that we need to acknowledge from the outset that church hurt is a real thing that we've probably seen, maybe we've experienced that people are. And so, it's definitely something that we shouldn't just outright dismiss as a something that's not real. Like, we need to be willing to understand that it is a real thing and that people have experienced and are experiencing it and unfortunately will continue to experience it. And so how can we be prepared to help people through it? What can we do to put things in place to kind of limit church hurt from a leadership ministry kind of perspective? Like, all of that's important as we lay the foundation for this conversation.
I agree. Brad, anything?
Not really. I think we'll nuance it probably, as you said, as we talk about some of these things.
Got it. Okay, good. Yeah. And we do want to get down to the nuance. I mean, I like to think that's part of what we really strive for here at Four Preachers in a Podcast. And so we're going to dig into this, like I said, over the next 6 episodes. When we talk about church hurt, Chance, I know you were doing a little research. Did you come up on like a good definition or something that you felt like really encapsulated it well? No, not really.
No, not what I was looking for. Like, I tried to read Tried to look for a couple of books to see if I could find a good, like, solid definition, but
Mm-hmm.
nothing that really jumped out to me that I was like, "Oh, that's what I was looking for."
Yeah.
But I think when we're thinking about church hurt, like, we're not, I don't think, mainly talking about some kind of physical violence or physical hurt.
Yeah.
Like, it's much more an emotional kind of abuse. I mean, that can have potentially physical manifestations, right? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
could be damaged in an emotional way and then deal with physical consequences of that
Yeah.
in different ways. But mainly, I think we're talking about some kind of spiritual, emotional kind of mishandling, mistreatment, abuse that has caused pain, agony, heartache, hurt in some way,
Yeah.
deeply, an internal hurt that may not even be seen by others or perceived by others on the surface.
Yeah. And to that point, that mean this church hurt, while it's a fairly newer term, I don't know exactly when it sort of came into our vernacular, but it's not. That doesn't mean that it's a new concept. And in a way, it's probably a good thing for the church that this is coming to light, because if there are those and have been those, whether we're talking about Christendom at large or the those who are trying to specifically follow the New Testament pattern specifically, um, if that's lurking in the background, that's a problem. In the same way that it's a problem that Diotrephes loves to have the preeminence, and a lot of times it's the Diotrephes type who may inflict this kind of church hurt. Although we're not even going to put that in a box necessarily and say that it's uniquely so. But if that's happening, that's an issue. The point I'm trying to raise is that. And so, my purposes, I'm sure you guys, we hadn't talked about this specifically, but I mean, we don't want to have like a, you know, okay, for years we have teased about doing a ministry podcast called What Grinds My Gears. Okay. And I don't think any of us wants this mini series to turn into that. This isn't just a place where we come and rant about all the stuff we've seen. But having said that, um, if there are issues that need to be addressed, it is right to address those issues, and it is not right to sweep them under the rug. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we're going to call out congregations, and say, "Hey, you're in the wrong." There's a right way to address the issues as well, which is not always a public way, But at the same time, we need to be talking about this. It's a good thing to do. So. Brad, have you come across you do a bunch of reading? I know that you mentioned before we hit the big red record button that there was a book that sort of took this in a different direction than maybe we typically think of it. But whether that book or others, I mean, have you come across books or any kind of reading insights that help us on this issue of church hurt?
There was one I read at the end of, I forget, it was a couple of years ago, but it was called Bully Pulpit: Confronting the Problem of, well, my Kindle just quit on me.
Whoa.
Confronting the Problem of Spiritual Abuse in the Church by Michael Kruger.
Huh.
And he himself is a scholar. And so he admits when he writes the book, he's like, I'm in the academic world. I'm not really in the ministry world.
Mm.
Um, but I'm going to give you the observations that I have. And so he does do a good job. And look, if you look at some of these churches and the controversies that have surrounded them, like Mars Hill out in Washington, with Mark Driscoll and some of
Mm.
the others, um, I mean, intimidation, bullying, it has, and I think I could argue even in churches of Christ, that this has happened,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
where this is uh, the idea behind this spiritual abuse. I know Chance mentioned abuse earlier. The idea behind this is spiritually harming people by the way we conduct ourselves and the way that we act,
Yeah.
and not in any way. Now, certainly, when people think about abuse, many times in church circles, it's about a physical abuse or a sexual abuse or something along those lines. But this book
Mm-hmm.
focuses solely upon acting and conducting ourselves in ways that spiritually abuse, bully, and intimidate people. And And so it's one that I found to be extremely helpful, although it's been a little while since I've read it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that focus that there's spiritual hurt. And again, to your point, like we're not trying to act as though there aren't issues where people are sexually abused or physically abused, even within religious circles, and the extent to which that influences what we're calling church hurt is undeniable. Nevertheless, church hurt is certainly broader than that, I think, and we're going to kind of keep it on that broader level, and more focused on emotional and more to the point, spiritual abuse. And I think a lot of people feel a little disenfranchised in religious circles today because they feel as though they were not served well. That's really a too less of a way of describing it, but their leaders were lording over them, or they felt ostracized because they felt like they couldn't ask certain questions in Bible class, or maybe there was a sensitive situation where there was sin within a family, and the leadership wrote the whole family off rather than just the individual, the family member who was in sin. They kind of treated all of them like untouchables. So there are tons of examples here of church hurt. There's no way to fully exhaust it, but it is something that we need to talk about. And to what both of you guys said, this starts on a leadership level. And, preachers, I'm not saying we have to preach on this all the time, but I think in our meetings with other ministers, in our conversations with deacons, in the conversations with elders, if you're an elder listening to this, if you're a deacon listening to this, as you're meeting on a regular basis, we need to take it very seriously when people seem to be struggling, and realizing that their struggles, it could be the way that everybody struggles, temptation, weaknesses, sort of the ebbs and flows of life. But it could also be because they're dealing with things, and especially if you live in an area that's very transient, or maybe you get some new folks who come in and they don't share the same background as most of the other people maybe who've been around for all these years. I'm not saying look at them cynically. Boy, this is going to feel like you got to caveat everything you say. But to realize that we're coming from different places, and their experiences are valid, even though they may vastly differ. I guess what I'm saying is I live and preach in a college town, okay? And so there's a lot of transient stuff going on here. And the college students, I don't want to paint them with too broad a brush, but there are a lot of college students who feel as though the church is not a place for them. And a lot of that is rooted in what they would call church hurt. And so we need to take this pretty seriously. And it's not just Gen Z, it's millennials. It's not just Gen Z and millennials. It's so many others, and whether they would call it by that term or not. So, all right, I need to be quiet. What are y'all's thoughts here before we move forward? Chance?
I think you're right. Like, everybody brings their experience, their past experience, their life experience, and as leaders in the church, leadership in the church, like, we have to be open to sitting with them, listening to them, and empathizing, like entering into their world and trying to understand, okay, they may think this way and feel this way. Okay, how did they get here?
Mm-hmm.
And like, what is contributing to in their past that has brought them to this way of thinking, or where they're at, or what their perception is, and then how can we move forward together in our walk with Jesus that encourages and helps. It boils down to the work of the church ultimately is people, and that's what Jesus was about. Jesus was about people and demonstrating compassion and moving people along. Sometimes some moved along faster than others, but still walking with them where they were. And so, that's what we've got to work on as preachers, as elders, deacons. Like, our work is people. And so it's entering into their lives, as messy as that is, sitting with them, understanding where they are, why they're there, how they got there, and then together we're marching toward Jesus and following in his footsteps.
And sometimes that's going to mean we have to take a long, hard look in the mirror and realize that
Yep.
Maybe the leadership styles are ineffective. Maybe they're inadvertently, I hope it would only be inadvertently, accidentally hurting others. Or, hey, listen, maybe something needs to be evaluated. You know, do you have a rogue elder? Do you have a preacher who always preaches down at people? You know, I remember one time when I was preaching somewhere else, and I met with this family. They'd been coming for years to the congregation there, and people were kind of like, I wonder why they don't place membership. You know, so we had lunch with them one day, and they said, Robert, listen, we love the church, and we love that congregation of the church, but where we came from, the elders took things in a direction that was not biblical. And we just have a lot of trouble trusting elders now because of them. You know, now I think I'd call that church hurt. You know, I mean, here were individuals who had spiritual and emotional damage. I could say trauma. I don't know. I'm not a licensed counselor, but you know, it sort of seems that way from a layman's point of view to me. And they just felt as though they couldn't, and so you know that was going to require a little patience and stuff. But I wasn't about to get in the pulpit the next Sunday and preach a sermon about why you need to be a member of a local congregation, even though I believe that is how Christians are supposed to function, right? But you know, I'm just trying to be sensitive, so I think that's
Yep.
that's something to consider. We need to be willing to take a long, hard look. Um,
Yeah, the answer in that
yeah,
moment is probably not to preach a sermon or have a one-on-one Bible study about, you know, like, you need to be sheep under a shepherd or, you know, membership, but about
yes,
helping them process what they've been through and then helping them to see not every eldership is the same, and, you know,
yeah.
helping them to know the elders there on a one-on-one basis and see that their care and compassion and, you know, like I said, slowly working with them and slowly moving in the right direction.
And part of this is hard to say at all because even that statement, Chance, while I fully agree, not every eldership
Yep.
is the same. We shouldn't have to say that. You know, like
Yep.
if it's an eldership, you know, we're assuming that there are biblical characteristics to which they're striving to live up, and all of that. You know, 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 and Acts 20 and 1 Peter 5. But hey, we're people, and your elders are people too, and so that's just part of it. It's hard. Um,
Well, I think some of
yeah,
this talk goes to what we talked about before we started recording, and that is um, how we view the church. Many times can set us up for tremendous hurt.
mm,
And that is, we have this kind of romantic view of the church that everybody in there is going to always act a certain way, always know what we need, always be there for us, always this, always that. In essence, almost perfection and mind reading.
yeah,
And to be fair, that's a totally unfair expectation.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
Yep.
Um, I mean, it just cannot happen. And so if I go in with the expectation, well, I'm setting myself up to be hurt because I've got standards that I, I mean, I don't know that even God holds us to.
mm,
And so we have to be cautious in how we're looking at it. And one of the things we need to do is to be realistic. Like, yes, I I do believe we should trust our elders and they should be good men. But that's not an endorsement of blindly following
mm-hmm,
and justifying everything that they do. And the same goes for any position you want to put out there in preaching and in teaching. And so, um, I think we could do a better job of helping people. A lot of people say if you talk about that, then in essence, what I've heard is that's the church and Jesus died for it, and you're being critical of it. I'm
yeah,
not being critical of it. I'm
mm-hmm,
simply see if these are assessments that Jesus has made. Why did he put patterns and build these things for reconciliation within the very fabric of how we're to operate?
mm,
Because he knows we're not perfect.
yeah,
And so saying we're not going to be perfect and we're not always going to get it right, we need to communicate that. That's not an excuse for us not to do our best, and it's not an excuse for us to run over people and say, "Oh, I'm just human."
mm-hmm,
But we do need to hold that reality out in front of people.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, the epistles. I mean, what virtually every one of the epistles offers some words of exhortation. You know, do this a little better at the very least. So you know, it's okay. It's okay for us to point out that there are areas in which we can improve. This does hurt our ego. It hurts the pride a little bit. At the same time, Brad, I like how you balanced us out, because sometimes we set ourselves up for things, and then we position ourselves as though we're the victims, because we had unrealistic expectations. And then there are other times where we may call something church hurt, and that's not what it is at all. And boy, this can get complex. You know, sometimes I'm hurt, and so I'm looking for a scapegoat, and the church seems like a great place to go for to be that scapegoat. So I've gone to the right place, but I've done the wrong things when I got there, and that's just not the way it needs to be either. So this is really, really hairy, and I know that there are a million caveats and things that we probably should and ought to say. I do want us to be careful while we're introducing this topic to make sure that we don't call it church hurt when it's not. And you know, that's something that to me, that all falls down on these notions that you guys just shared about. Listen, Jesus did give us this framework. Here's what you do when you're offended, when you're at an impasse with another person. And then I think about like Colossians chapter 3, which says, bear with one another, or bearing. You're bearing with one another in love, which kind of means putting up with each other. I mean, there are going to be moments when it's not easy to get along with each other, and we may be offended, or maybe even we are hurt. And to understand that there is a burden of reconciliation upon every Christian, whether you are the offended or the offender, while at the same time recognizing that there could be situations, extreme situations, in which uh, perhaps a little distance would be best. So I don't know. I'm speaking in generalities here and hypotheticals, but anyway, somebody bail me out. What are your thoughts here? Should we go down the Matthew 18 route a minute?
Well, I mean, you can, or you can look at examples. I mean, the one I'm studying Acts right now personally, and so
Okay.
Acts 15 is
Yeah.
where Paul and Barnabas have a dispute about whether or not John Mark should go, and they have very strong feelings about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
One being Barnabas, of course, being extremely supportive, the way you would expect him to be, and Paul is just not buying into it because of previous behavior.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that is important to us to figure out. This is what I've come to see, and I hope I can explain what's in my head. I don't always do a good job of that.
Just keep your teeth in your mouth.
Exactly. As long as I can do that, I think I'll be
Yeah.
okay.
That's right.
But some people, and I don't know if it's their background or just their relationships in general, the way they operate, there's no in between with them. They're either all about you or they don't want to even breathe the same air as you. Okay. Like they don't understand the disagreements and difference of philosophies and parting ways and still maintaining a healthy relationship. They just don't understand that notion. And so when
Yeah.
it comes, they treat every issue like it is, a life or death issue, as opposed to simply being able to look at it in a healthy way and saying, look, we're not going to see eye to eye on this issue, but this is what we're going to do. You're going to take him, I'm going to take him, and we're going to go in different directions. And the work is not going to suffer, it's going to multiply.
Mm-hmm.
And some people cannot do that. For the life of me, I can't get it. That they just cannot. Everything has to be because of a conflict, and uh, it's like we're ashamed to say we saw things differently and we just decided to mutually part ways. It
Mm-hmm.
makes it sound better to say, "Well, I had to stand for the truth."
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
really, it's not a truth matter that's under discussion here.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the example that they have, and there's debate about does Paul admit in 2 Timothy 4, hey, okay, yeah, I got it wrong, because he says bring Mark because he's profitable for the ministry.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Either way, they didn't allow that disagreement, which Barnabas had played a huge role in Paul's, rise to becoming an influential individual when nobody wanted anything to do with him. So,
Right.
Yep. Yep.
um, and it'd have to be something to kind of sever that relationship, not sever it, but
Mm-hmm.
to say we're just not going to work together anymore in this sense directly. And so, um, I think sometimes that's where church hurt. We magnify problems and we think that we're not spiritual if we just simply say, "Hey, we just don't see that the same. We don't operate the same, and so
Mm.
we're going to go in different directions." So then, what I'm going to have to do is say, "I stand for truth, and you don't, and I'm going to demonize you."
Mm.
And it's like we simply can't understand a difference.
And I love the notion that the work continued. It wasn't
Yes.
throwing out the whole church because of this disagreement. And whatever we do, and boy, I get it, man. This church hurt, like, it runs deep, and some of the examples I've heard even recently are really, really rough. Nevertheless, that Jesus came and established his church, his kingdom, like, and he purchased it with his own blood. So this is important to him. And therefore, I can't just cast it off when the church is a little too people-y. I've got to trust him enough to say, okay, he says I need this, so it's best for me. I really don't want to have surgery. I don't like the notion of being put under. I don't like the notion of somebody, cutting me open with a scalpel. I definitely don't want the recovery and all of that. But, these people say this is best for me. And so I'm going to have to be ready to bear up under this pain and do the hard work of recovery. And maybe there's some applicable principles there to our episode today too. How this is an introductory episode, everybody, but let's just end by talking about this difference. And Brand, you were there, between being hurt by members of the church and being offended by what is actually truth. You were giving us an example where, hey, listen, Mark or no Mark, okay, it's not sinful to preach the word with Mark beside you. It's not sinful to preach the word without Mark beside you. Okay. Sometimes there are actual matters of truth that, there may be disagreements about, although the truth is definitely clear. It's there. How do we navigate all of this? I mean, what's the difference here between hurt by a church and being offended by truth?
Well, I mean, you back up in the context just before this, there's been a controversial thing that was worth getting together and sorting out that they
Mm,
thought was a difference in the gospel. Basically, they took the words of Jesus and said, "He who believes and is baptized and is circumcised will be saved."
mm-hmm.
And they said, "No, that's no, that's not gonna." And if it seems Paul is alluding to that in Galatians as well, and he said that kind of thing we weren't going to allow. Um, and I think with some of it, how do I tell the difference between church hurt? Man, like you said, there's so many layers to this. Okay, so did the church hurt me? And I understand that all members are the church, that the
Yeah.
people are the church. But is one person, because one person does something and mistreats me, does that mean the whole church mistreated me? Like I can't in my mind bring myself to say that. I can't say that because a handful of people acted in a way that was inappropriate that the whole thing hurt me. So for me, when I think about that, I think about that caveat. Um, And I think about really being open to when, we were talking about what's the difference between being hurt by the church and being offended by truth. Um, I mean, you got to be willing to look at yourself and consider the possibility you're wrong. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's just part of well, I mean, there's no way you can be a Christian without admitting that you've been wrong. I mean,
Hmm.
so why would you automatically assume that you couldn't be wrong now about something? So, but either way, even if we're on the side of truth, the way that we treat people, we ought to be extremely gracious in our handling of people. Um,
Yeah.
and I know people will cite Galatians 2 that Paul withstood him to the face. And in that specific circumstances, with all of the implications and the actual illustration of something that was going on, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't go over there and chew him out and drop kick him. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
He simply went to him. I think a lot of times we get in trouble because a lot of people read texts like that and they say, well, that's what I'm doing. No, you're not. The situation is not the same. It's just not the same. So I don't even know how to answer the question you asked, or even if I did. So, um,
No, that was good. Yeah, I agree.
I
Chance,
mean,
what are your
just
thoughts? Yeah.
yeah, thinking about something that Brad was talking about with Galatians 2, like withstood him to the face. Like we have to be careful then not to just read into the text what we think that looks like from our perspective and the way we would do it. Like
Yeah.
we don't have a like Paul could have withstood him to the face, and he probably did in meekness and in the gentleness of Jesus,
Yeah.
right? And so you can stand in opposition directly without it being harsh, aggressive, and hurtful in that way. And like there is even Jesus, as he's talking about coming to bring truth, coming to bring the teachings of God to humanity. Like he talks about how truth is by its nature divisive, and it will separate, you know, those who believe it and follow it from those who don't. And he talks
Mm-hmm.
about how he didn't come in some passages. He talks about how he came to bring peace, and then in other ways he said, "I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword."
Mm-hmm.
So there is a reality to the fact that truth can offend and truth can cause division in that sense. But I guess kind of the nuance or the difference is thinking about the presentation of that truth. Like it doesn't, truth can be presented and should be presented. 2 Corinthians 10:1, Paul talks about coming to the Corinthians in the meekness and gentleness of Jesus, or Galatians 6:2, um, the one who is spiritual, restoring in a spirit of meekness, which I think reflects probably back to Galatians 2 about how Paul withstands Peter to the face. He's going
Oh,
to talk
yeah.
about it later in the letter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that should be the approach instead of we could take truth and start using it like a baseball bat to just knock people around with it. And now they're going to be hurt, but not really because of truth, but because of our approach with it, our presentation of it, our harsh use of it suddenly what has caused hurt as opposed to the truth itself. And so we
Yeah.
want to present the truth of Jesus in a gentle way, an understanding way, a humble way, a meek way, so that truth is allowed to work in their heart and not our intimidation, not the force of our words. I think sometimes we're tempted in even, we talk about the new Christianity is described in the New Testament in text as with metaphors of spiritual warfare. Um, but Paul to the Corinthians, like the weapons of our warfare aren't carnal, but we're
Mm-hmm.
tempted, I think, to use our words in spiritual warfare in a carnal way, in the same way the world would use them: intimidation, manipulation. Uh, and when we just use our words to speak truth in meekness, gentleness, humility, then we can rely on the power of God to be active and working. When we try to do it in another way, like we're trying to, I think, trust in our own power and our own force. Like if we can just force this truth on them, then they will respond, when we should trust in the power of God and the power of Jesus and present it in the right way. So maybe that is something about the difference between church hurt and being offended by truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
the the way you kind of parsed that I thought was really good
Me
because
too.
I mean, okay, let's say we're having a doctrinal discussion. We think, and I as a preacher think that something should go this way. I think this is what the Bible says about what we should do. Somebody comes and says, "No, I think this is what the Bible says what we should do." Well, it could be that I hurt you in that process, but my hurt is in the way that I treat you, the way that I share my opinion, the way that I disagree, the way that I do those things. That can be church hurt. I can be as gracious and as gentle and allow it simply to be truth. In essence, if I have to have that conversation with someone, I want them to walk away understanding that it's not the way I presented it. It's simply he's bound to a conviction the same way I'm bound to one. And that's it. Like, in essence, if a person is offended, I don't want them to ever be able to walk out of that room and say, well, he did, and his attitude and his tone and I want it to be, no,
Yeah.
here were the reasons.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference between being offended by truth and being hurt by the church is, and for some reason I still cannot comprehend, some people equate that if you are gracious in disagreeing with people, that you are somehow weak. I would argue that you have greater strength because you don't let your emotions, you don't let things get in the way. You believe in letting God be God and let him talk and let him communicate and him make his points, and you simply be a conduit. And so, um, yeah, I think that's a good difference between the two.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of one of Jesus's statements, we're to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And that would be true in our presentation of truth and the way we teach and preach and work with people. Harmless as doves, not like stampeding like elephants or something and causing destruction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that has applications all over the board, right? Like, I've been guilty of it. That even the way that we preach, we can be led to believe that we're supposed to basically preach at people.
Yes.
And we're supposed to force it. I mean, look, I don't know if it's how I was taught or simply it's what I perceived or if it's what I knew. Like, I don't know at this point, and I'm not going to waste a whole bunch of time trying to figure it out. Okay. But either way, I don't do it anymore. And Eddie Parrish at Focal Point this last year had just a phenomenal study about this. When I remember it was a question or a statement, but the thrust of it remains the same, and that is, what you think of the people to whom you preach will come across in how you preach to them. And if you think that they're the problem, that's exactly how you'll preach at them. But if you realize them to be fellow strugglers that are trying their best, even though they're going to get it wrong the same way you do, then it will flavor and show, your gentleness will come across, and the way that you honor and respect them will come across. And that really is, I think, the difference between abuse. That's where abuse begins, is when you start devaluing the people and demonizing the people that have been entrusted to your care.
I think some of that too is sometimes our nerves cause us to come across in a way differently than what we anticipate. Youthfulness, immaturity, and sometimes you just need more experience doing something. That's kind of what I mean by youthfulness. I mean, it's not like I don't want to love these people. I just don't really know how to do it well yet. So I don't know.
It could be. Sorry. It could be that you're just so young.
Right.
The way that all of us were 20 when we started, 21, 22. Like, we didn't have the life experience to know what it's like to be up with a kid all night. We didn't know what it was like.
Right.
I mean, just the exhaustion that can go along with things.
Right.
But the older, we're not old, but we're all pushing 40. I mean, we have kids.
Whoa.
Whoa, look out.
So
I'm
I mean,
37. I'm not old.
I'm not.
I didn't say I was old. I said we're older. Um, but it just changes the way you
Yeah,
look at people.
it
Like,
does.
think about this. Okay, one simple example. You're 23 years old and you're preaching a sermon and somebody falls asleep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You are now 37, 38 years old and somebody falls asleep.
Well, I'm
What's your
just so
first
used
thought?
to it by this point. No,
Well, it's true. It's true.
I just want to trade places with them.
yeah, that's right. That's
Exactly. I'm like, hey, but honestly, at 23, you're mad. Why aren't you
Yeah.
listening?
Yeah,
At 38, you're like, you know what? If I weren't up here, I'd probably be struggling to stay awake too.
right.
I mean, or
Could happen
look
to
at
any
the
of us.
medicine they're on, or the treatments
Right.
that they're taking, or the
That's
young
right.
baby that they have,
Or they worked a whole shift overnight and they came here straight from work. Stuff
Yep.
like that. Yeah.
Yep.
I've been. I just wrote down 4 things that are kind of in summary, I think, of what we're saying as we kind of land the plane on this episode. There's more to say, and we're going to say more in the future. Number 1, I think we're just saying church hurt is real. We're not denying that. But I also think, number 2, that the phrase church hurt ought to be carefully used. And I want to be sure that I'm not assuming somebody's motives, or anything like that. And don't, maybe I shouldn't claim church hurt without having talked to that person first. And to me, this may not always be true. I'm willing to admit that. Church hurt seems to be a result of a pattern, established behavior, not necessarily a one-off kind of encounter. I suppose it could be, but to me, it's more of a patterned thing.
I think that's probably right.
Yeah. Okay. And then I also wrote down here that it is up to me, number 3, it is up to me to show grace. Jesus, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he didn't threaten. This one's the harder one of the previous 2, because admittedly, I don't know what you've been through and all of that, sure. But Jesus shows us the very difficult pattern. And 1 Peter 2:21, when it says later in verses 22 and 23, when he was reviled, he didn't revile in return, and so on, it says, this is an example for you that you should walk like this. And so, suffering, not just in doing bad, but because I'm doing the right thing, because I'm doing good. That doesn't take away the reality of the church hurt. That doesn't excuse any behavior. That just says, I can't control the way you're being, but I can control the way I respond to the way you're being. And that's all that is. And then I think we've also said, to balance all this out, I need to be willing to look in the mirror. And sometimes I need to realize that I could be the one who's not looking at this right. And so, I don't need to play a victim kind of mentality, things like that. Having said all of that, what I'd like to say kind of in conclusion, then we'll go around the horn, is if you have gone down the road with somebody and you've tried to reconcile and you've tried to show grace and you have looked in the mirror and let's say what you're dealing with is legitimate church hurt. It's okay to call it that. And we've been saying today, I guess this is a 5th thing, we've been saying today that it does unfortunately happen. And so let's call it what it is. Let's do what we can to try and help the situation. Let's trust good people in whom we can confide and whose counsel we can seek, and do what we can to make it right. But remember along the way that the Lord is still ultimately in control, and that you are still amenable to him, and that he has a plan for all of his people, which includes the church. And so I guess I'm saying don't let your reaction be such that takes you away from him and away from his people as well. What do you guys want to say to clean that up?
I think that's a pretty good summary. I'll just turn our attention for a moment to Psalm 23 and to think about how David thinks of God. And he says, "The Lord is my shepherd." And amongst the things that he does is he anoints his head with oil.
Mm.
Probably has to do with treating and addressing wounds. And so in a church hurt context, I mean, we can remember that our God is a shepherd, and he's not just to shepherd the hurts that we might experience from the world, although he does that. But if it does come down to the fact that some of his own people have been responsible for our hurt, like, he is a shepherd who understands that too, and is there to care for our hurts, to meet us in those moments, and to give us his goodness and his mercy and his love and his abundance to shepherd to us in those moments too.
Yeah. I love that. Brad?
I would say, and I'm not saying this, I hope this illustration doesn't in any way disparage the church, because that's certainly not the intention at all. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, as I've thought about church hurt and what little I have received in my life and in ministry, I have received very little compared to so many others, and have been guilty of plenty of it myself. So let me just kind of set that whole thing in context, hopefully. At the end of the day, even if the church treats me poorly, until Jesus mistreats me, mm-hmm. I'm not going anywhere. Mm. Like, I'm not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'm not in any way worried he's going to mistreat me. Yeah. And so, even if the churches in the areas where I'm located come from a similar stripe and they do the same things, it's not indicative. In essence, if they are mistreating me, they are acting in a way that's inconsistent with the Lord himself. Yeah. And it's not, I'm not going to allow the inconsistencies of other people to drive me away from a consistent, loving Lord. Yeah. And that's, theoretically, and the way Jesus designed it, we would have a perfect connection with him, and we'd have a great connection with each other, and they would fuel each other. Mm-hmm. But you know what? When push comes to shove, if the church gets it wrong, I'm still going to stick with Jesus. That's right. Good points. All right, there's more to say, and I think on our next episode, we're going to be turning our attention at church leaders, not necessarily to gang up on them or anything, but just maybe offer some resources and tips. We'd love to hear from you along the way. mail@thelightnetwork.tv. Thanks for being a part of 4 Preachers in a Podcast. Till next time, stay cool.